sit on this side, so I don't have to sit with my back to it.
Welcome everybody. Thank you. Some of you welcome second time. Just got done with landowner dinner, so appreciate that. There is still food available for newcomers. If you would like, feel free to dish up. Find me for your tickets if you need some of those. Usually I'm pretty generous with giving them out, I think. So thank you for your time coming out. We've now welcomed in, some more general public officials, and there will be time to comment as well. I'm going to hand it over to Paul real quick, who is our CEO. And we also have a special guest here tonight, Alan Anderson, who will be giving a speech as well too. So feel free, get your questions ready, general discussion, and if anything doesn't get answered, come find one of us afterwards. We'll hash it out. Otherwise, I'll pass it off to Paul, the CEO, and he will introduce Alan.
Great. Great, thank you. Thanks, Lucas. I'm Paul White with PRC Wind. Thanks for coming. We had a landowner meeting tonight from the project. Now we have some commissioners and public joining, and we're going to kind of cut back to the chase and have a conversation about some of the topics, and look forward to the discussion. I just want to quickly, for the folks that joined, just make sure everybody's aware that we entered into the project entered into a letter of intent with the NRABC to deliver additional economic development benefits to the community, which is exciting. I've never seen anything quite like this on a project, and it's the culmination of almost 20 years of work by the community looking for economic development for Wells and Eddy community counties area, and it's very exciting to have that in place. And the project itself, we've sold, the power is contracted with Dakota, so we're at that point where now we pivot to planning construction. This is a normal time when some folks show up from the community, a few people show up. It's usual that don't want to see it, and it's not unusual. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. What do you do when some folks want to see it? Some people are working for it, and it's part of what matters to them. It delivers value for the community. Nobody can argue that there's not enormous economic value for everybody in the region. But some people don't want to see it. What do you do with that? That's what we're going to talk about. We're at the finish line. We're planning construction. I've been talking to commissioners the last month or two. Seems like they're kind of ripping their hair out and don't have a lot of resources and experience on how do you permit this stuff? What should we be doing? We're going to talk a little bit about that. But it occurred to me that the townships and county folks that are working on this don't have, nobody's talking about the permitting process that's in place at the state level. North Dakota has a very robust, which is among the best in the United States. It's comparable to other states. It delivers safe wind projects. So there is a well-established regime that's been developed over 20 years with the state of North Dakota. I have a summary of that here that we pulled together, just the facts on the permitting process in North Dakota, where to come from, how does it work, how does it compare with other states, what does it mean for the townships and the counties. This is available if you'd like it. I've shared it with commissioners to the best of my email list. If you don't have it or you know somebody that needs it, happy to share it. But the message is we have safe permitting in place in North Dakota for every single project. Whether the counties and townships do anything at all, it doesn't really matter. The truth is, at this point, we're in jeopardy of the townships and counties getting, hopefully not, going down a road where the project can't happen because they unintentionally create standards that can't be met. So that's the risk here. So we have a project that's now pretty well designed, not final, but getting very close and ready to apply for a permit. This is a good technology for rural America. It's safe. We have permitting through the state that will make sure it's safe for everybody. We don't need the county and township to do anything. Yet, there are some naysayers that come and they want the county and the townships to pass standards that are much more extreme than what the state of North Dakota and most states in the U.S. have put in place. What do we do with that? What should I do when my neighbor a mile away says, well, I don't want you to farm that crop. I don't want you to build that building on your property. It's a property rights issue. What do you do with that? What do we do with that? I know there's folks here that feel that very way, so I'm not trying to make anybody look bad or anything. It's just it's a debate that comes up, and we can talk about it together. We have we're very fortunate to have the benefit of an expert on that topic here. Alan Anderson from Kansas City is a lawyer and a professor. I'll let him speak to his credentials. I can't even explain it. I'm going to ask him to do it like this. Is that better? Okay, chin on the mic. Chin on the mic. And talk slow. So Alan will speak to property rights. And I'm looking forward to it. And what should we do with questions? Maybe 5 to 8 minutes. Let's give Alan 10 minutes to go through a presentation. And then we'll open it up for discussion. Okay? Alan Anderson. Okay, if I get this off the chin and you can't hear me, do just raise your hand, because I do not have a voice that carries, so I'll use the microphone, so I'll try. We'll see if this does it. So I'm Alan Anderson. I'm the chair of the Energy Practice Group at the Polson-Ellie Law Firm. Based in our Kansas City office. We have offices around the country. We're about 1,100 lawyers. We work on energy projects throughout our footprint, from Miami to Seattle, from New York to Los Angeles, and a heavy emphasis in the Midwest, where I am in Kansas City. But probably more importantly for the purpose of this discussion is I'm a professor at the University of Kansas Law School, and I teach renewable energy law. And as part of that, and so again, happy to answer questions about the grid, how wind project intersects with our energy system, all those different things, and I cover that. But for this purpose, it's the land use part. Because we're going through a process right now in the county, you're all very aware, is going around, that's similar to what goes around the country, and it's how do we intersect with people's their property in a county with zoning where there's land rights. And so in my class, I cover this. And so the one way to cover would be just, here's the permitting process, you file for this, you go through this, and and they vote. But what I do in my class is I go back to the origin story of property rights and land use, because land use is how we restrict the person's ability to use their property. And so I think it's important for the students to understand the whole process and how we get to this end point, as opposed to just what is the end process. So, because when someone does something on zoning, they're inevitably, just by the definition of it, they're taking away some use because they're putting a restriction. That can be a good thing. And so well done land use creates an orderly process for things that are healthy and safe. As we heard here, and so this is all that I'm going to talk about is requires and predicated upon the fact that it is a safe use. The great thing in North Dakota, as Paul mentioned, is you have a state that has gone through the arduous process of determining what are the appropriate siting criteria. In North Dakota, this is where North Dakota and New York see eye to eye, similar criteria, because that's what the science shows. So the thing is we can be safe here, when I go into the discussion of property rights, is we know that this is a healthy and safe use at the state criteria. So we start there. But so then we go back to property rights, and I'm going to take you all the way back to the origin story of the country. So we have the Revolutionary War, which, as you know, we prevailed. So now we're writing our Constitution, and we're making a determination of how is our country going to be organized? What are our systems in place?
is, how are we going to work as a country now that we have our chance to do it ourselves? And that was an incredible point in time. And we had a phenomenal moment where we had people who wrote the Constitution were incredibly prescient for what would be necessary going forward. And you think about how important the Constitution is to all of us. I'm going to just focus on one small part, which is how we dealt with property from the beginning. So from this origin story of the Constitution, and James Madison was kind of one of the main authors as it relates to the Constitution and then the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment is the protection of life, liberty, and property. And James Madison wrote the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment, he put those three things on the same plane, so life, liberty, and property, because he believed property was equal to life and liberty. In fact, he believed that how we use our property was an expression of liberty. That is how you provide for your family. That's how you create security. That's how you intersect with the broader world. So your property for Madison and the other founding fathers was how we express liberty. So he was really concerned about our new country, that we would have systems in place that would protect that property because it's how we express liberty. So Madison writes, along with the other founding fathers, along with John Jay, Monroe, and they write what are known as the Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers are incredible political works, some of the most important literally in the world on political discourse. And they're writing these to describe why we created these terms in our Constitution. Not that we just write it willy-nilly the Constitution, it's why did we do it? And so we have these documents that describe it. Well, Madison writes Federalist Paper number 10. Federalist Paper number 10 covers a few things, but the main core of it is how do we think about property. So here we're going to form our country. We're going to be our own version in the world. How do we as a country, through the Constitution, want to deal with property? So what he was concerned about, post-revolution, as we're getting up, he writes this in 1787, he saw some things that had him concerned. So he saw there were some actual attempts from physically taking people's property away from them. There were some rebellions where they saw people and they said, well, you have too much. And because of that, we as a group should be able to get together and come and take that from you. And that concerned him. The other way he was seen in the U.S. and other places of the world, we don't have to do it by brute force. We can use the government to do that. We can go get the governing body, the elected officials. If we get enough people, we can get them to vote to take away property from someone. And that concerned him. So Madison and the Founding Fathers, in the writing of the Constitution, decided we need to have protections for property, even against a majority that may come to their elected officials and say, I want you to take their property away. So that's what he writes in the Constitution, Federalist Paper number 10, and then eventually the Fifth Amendment, protection of life, liberty, and property, because it was how we express our liberty. So then Madison and the other fathers believe once we have a good use of someone's property, it's healthy, it's safe, it's for the greater good, that then government's role is to protect that person's use of their property. The government's job is to protect the property rights against people who would take it, even if they come in what he called factions, even if that group comes to them and it's the majority. So this is the remarkable thing about the Constitution. It wanted to protect against the taking of people's property, even if a large group came together and demanded it from the government. That's how important he thought this system was for the United States. And you think about our free market capitalist system, that's why. This is how we intersect with the world. How you use your property is how we express liberty. And you can imagine a situation if we flip this role. If we said, by the way, I should say, it's against excessive even restrictions on it. So if you think about, we know in North Dakota and other states, 3 times 10 height for a setback from a home is incredibly safe. That goes beyond what we need for safety. It's more robust than you get in a lot of other states that have very successful projects. People will come and say, I want more. I want you to go and herd this, the mile. The mile is just taking away from your neighbor's use of that property. So they're coming and saying, I want to take my neighbor's property because I want to look at their property the way I want to. So now flip it. You have a nice couple, they move here, lovely area, they want to be near lakes, all the kind of good things you get here. They buy a property and they start their yoga studio. So they start the yoga studio, and it's great, but notice there's all these sounds and sometimes smells that come from the neighboring property, both from farming activity, there's cattle, there's other things. So can you imagine if they went to the county commission or township commission and said, I want you to tell my neighbor they have to stop putting cattle on their land? If you ask them not to do corn, I would like it to be native grass because it kind of gives me more zen. But can you imagine that taking place? Of course, it would be laughed out of the county. It's the same thing here, where now we have a healthy and safe use, and someone's coming and saying, I want you to take a mile of my neighbor's property away so that I can look at it the way I want. The Founding Fathers would have rolled over their grave, and here's why we know this. Washington, Hamilton, Monroe, and Madison were farmers. So when they wrote the Constitution, and they wrote the Fifth Amendment, the anticipation was, of course there will be activity on the property. Of course we'll see things on the neighbor's property. Of course there'll be activity and smells. So the full formation of the country is that people, we have a healthy and safe use, should be able to make the decisions of liberty by using their property the way they see fit, and that the government's role is to protect that use. So that's the origin story as we go to how we decided to create property rights and create what eventually becomes zoning and other things in America, but how we should see it. So what I tell my class is, it's not that we don't have restrictions. Of course we do, when they're the right ones and they're thoughtfully and carefully done. Then that's when we have a good system that's kind of based on the constitutional principles. So as we sit here today, as you think about it, I know we have decision makers, it's not whether you're for or against any given use, it's whether or not you believe in strong property rights and has this project been cited correctly so that it's healthy and safe, and then it's a determination of can you then stand on the shoulders of our founding fathers and protect property rights. Whether you lean for or against something, is this a community that believes in property rights? And I expect it does. So that's kind of the origin story. I'll give you the 26-hour version. We'll stop on that one. Happy to take questions.
I do. So I'm a small landowner out here. So you're telling me, I'm not quite sure where in the Constitution it says that I don't have no rights. There is a devaluation of property. And it is. It's known out there. That there's a devaluation of property. That there's a devaluation in property. So when you put something that close to my property, and we actually have Tim Ross, I think that's his name, was over in the Wells County meeting, and he even said that the minute that's announced, if you're within a mile of the project, there went 10% of my property value, 10 to 14%. That's a Berkeley study. Well, that was for the DOT. That's what he referenced over there. We have another, there's other people over there, it doesn't matter. But the issue is that, so you're talking about property rights, and I understand, I live in the country, I've never complained about someone, I complain about dust quite often, but not what people plant. But you're going to turn around and it's okay, so these guys are going to make money, and I'm going to turn around and take a loss, and they say maybe in 9 or 10 years it will be equal. So I just want to know where this is fair, and this is right.
Okay, first of all, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory did a study in 2014. They did a recent study that came out in December 2023, and it gets misquoted all the time. So the answer is, it once again found that in counties of less than 250,000, of which this is, there is absolutely no impact on property values. That's what it says. I've got the study, happy to show it to you. There's a little other discussion on large counties, so urban counties that have the greater 250,000. People then will refer to those, the different data on those counties, but the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory report, and I've got it, I pull it up, absolutely reinforces its previous 2014 study that there is no impact on property values. Secondarily, if you go here in North Dakota, you have projects already. Those projects didn't have that impact on property values. So just starting there, we've got the data. You go, we've contacted every county and state of Kansas that has 48 projects. Every county that has a project, I think it's 35 or 37 counties, never have we had impact on property values. So we'll start there. That just is the fact. And it's been reinforced by University of Texas, Wichita State University, I think it was Rhode Island. We've got a ton of studies that have looked into this. So that's the good news. In fact, oddly, I don't want to put cause and effect, but you could look at studies that look at counties that participate in projects they actually have greater property value increase because, this would be my, this is not in the studies, but you can imagine what happens. Michigan studied this, University of Michigan studied. When you participate, when your county hosts a project, a number of things happen. One, of course, is great economic impact, both to the county, both to the people in the county, that reverberates throughout. People who have farms, they invest in their farms and ranches. They're planned for succession planning, so they get more likely to have people come back and stay in that community. There's no question it has incredible reverberation to the positive of the county. So the answer is it's good for property values. But just to the second part is, again, the first thing that we talked about, does this have to be a healthy and safe use? Yes, it does. And at that point, the person gets to use their property. If you're based on a traditional constitutional-based property rights system, they get to use it. The person, that doesn't get to go a mile into someone else's property and say, I get to pick how you use it. So I appreciate there's information, there's misinformation in this case about property values. Fortunately, we've got a ton of data on this.
Well, I got another one then. Sure. You might as well keep it entertaining.
Let's do it.
There are studies, like you said, there's multiple stuff out here, so that's not an issue.
Yep.
So you talk about the land use out here. You talk about people, we interrupt that. So, and I'm sure Paul can attest to this, that when you have a turbine out there, there's a safety zone, evacuation zone around each one of these turbines. Is that correct? Is that correct? The safety zone, the evacuation zone around the wind turbine.
Yeah. So he'll answer.
So anyway, so we turn around in on the older turbines, the smaller ones. This actually comes from Texas A&M. They have a big class down there for technicians. But they even talk about 500-meter circle, an evacuation zone around each turbine. Now you guys talked about putting a tower 1.1 times the height, which in this case, if they're 700 foot, 770 feet. And you're going to put those 770 feet off my property line. Now 500 meters is 1,600 feet. And as I was told that, when they get taller, that zone gets bigger. But you do the math out here from 1,640 and from 770, so you're going to take 600 feet of my land. No, because that evacuation, if you have a fire, you have a runaway blade, you have something else out there, that's the evacuation zone.
I'm happy to take it when you're ready to get it. Good question. Yep.
And I appreciate you asking these questions, because anything you're thinking about, I'd love to talk about right here now. So you were kind of confusing things, and I'll tell you why we address this and how we know what we do is incredibly safe. So the first thing is we have incredible studies that have been done on if we have a turbine and it has either a blade that fails, so it's struck by lightning, particle, it does something like that. If ice forms on the blade, and assuming it keeps going, but of course they have different sensors to shut things down, because if you have ice on a blade, it creates an imbalance, and that can damage the turbine. No company wants this. But let's assume for the purpose of it did in studies that we let the turbine go and it throws ice. Or tower collapse. So for whatever reason, usually a blade, for some reason, hits the tower and it collapses. That 1.1 times turbine height, so the tip of the blade, absolutely protects us for all three of those things. We have incredible studies. There's a Dr. Jonathan Rogers at Georgia Tech has done multiple studies on this to show all three of those things give us far greater protection than you can imagine on that. So we don't have to guess. We've had all three of those events take place. We've had blades do fail. It's not very common, but it does happen. We have towers occasionally collapse, and we occasionally have ice. And we know that at 1.1 times the tip height covers all the protection you need for that. So much so that even the turbine manufacturers have agreed that is, they put it in their standards, that that's the distance. So then you go to the second topic, which is, if we have an emergency event, there's a fire in the turbine or something like that, is there a perimeter? Well, I stayed down at the Rock Inn. If we have a fire at the Rock Inn, you're going to do something to create a perimeter around that. So we don't want to confuse emergency situations with normal things. So if there's a fire, you would probably take a perimeter around it. You don't want to have a grass fire. There's different things that could take place. So you create an emergency perimeter for a rare event if it did take place. That's not how we do setbacks. Otherwise, you would have to have nothing downtown, because if you have a building next to another building, and there's a fire in a building, you couldn't have that building next door. So that's not how we do setbacks. We don't do setbacks for an emergency situation. We do them for the things that would happen from a day-to-day typical perspective. So you're clumping those two things together. So from a safety perspective, all the things we talked about, the state of North Dakota, who did the same hard work in looking at the engineering and science, they got it right. Same thing that the county could follow for these, which is different than if we have an emergency situation where you might create a perimeter for a fire or something like that.
When you're talking about these emergency situations, okay, say you have a fire in that turbine, are they going to have any emergency equipment that can get to those people if they happen to be on that turbine working?
So I'll talk generally, and what there'll be an emergency response plan. So if there's a fire in the turbine, they do not generally ask the local fireman who goes through the training on, well, here's what happens if one of those situations takes place. And they're not asked to go up and do a turbine. They're not asked to do any kind of the high climbs and that kind of thing. What they'll generally do is you'll create a perimeter around the turbine and make sure that something doesn't go beyond, there's not a grass fire or something like that.
So in other words, the people that could be on top, they're sacrificed then?
No. So here's where I am not an emergency response expert, but they have the plans in place in the incredibly rare circumstance where a fire would take place or something like that with people in the turbine. I don't know the exact response plan, but that is in place, so no, that's not the case. Generally, that there are those who are trained for such things that they don't require for the local emergency response. So no, they don't sacrifice people, of course not.
The short answer is yes, there is a plan.
Can we get a copy of that plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll have an emergency response plan as part of the whole process.
That's part of that would be part of the permitting that has to be in place, of course.
So to this point, we have something around 70,000 turbines in the country. We've been doing this for decades, so we don't have to guess as what we do in these situations. Fortunately, it's one of the most safe industries you can imagine. Doesn't mean nothing could happen, of course not. Farming and ranching, there accidents take place, of course there could be. But in this case, there's some incredible plans in place should that ever event take place.
So there's other turbines around that are this tall?
Yeah, the manufacturers make them. And again, the height is the difference between, say, a 500-foot, 600-foot, that doesn't change these kind of plants. Yes, they absolutely, there's other parts of the country that have tall turbines.
Where could we see them?
I don't have the list of exactly where they are.
There's Minnesota, North Dakota.
North Dakota has some that are this tall?
Yeah.
I've got a list. I think Cheryl asked me about it. I can share that.
Yeah. One of the interesting things, I've been in this business, in this industry for since 1990. And in the early days, I was working on turbines that were 200 kilowatts. So that was sort of the industry standard. And if you wanted to build say a 100 megawatt wind farm, you would need, 500 of those things. And you'd need a whole bunch of square miles of land, and it'd be filled with turbines, and they would turn really fast, high RPM. Those were maybe 60 meters, 50 meters tall, and today turbines are about 100 meters tall, top of the tower, the hub height where the generator is. So the tower height has increased from around 50 meters 30 years ago to 100 meters. That's the top of the tower. And the blades have gotten longer. So today we have a turbine that, let's call it 5 megawatts, is basically where pretty standard these days. 5 megawatts would be 25 of those small turbines. So now instead of having 25 turbines on the landscape, I have one. And so it's aesthetically much better from my experience. But what I wanted to get to is that when my experience looking at wind farms, I've looked at a